As the mechanic finished saying the words, the 3D printer only took a few seconds. "Wow," Elynn muttered, watching the glowing shape materialize before her. "It really just makes it that fast?" Ben Orlan smirked, wiping his hands on his grease-streaked coveralls. "Lovable doesn't mess around. Say it, print it, use it. No middleman, no restrictions." He grabbed the freshly printed stabilizer brace, still warm from fabrication, and fitted against the cracked support beam in her home. With a soft hiss, the material fused into place, adjusting to the structure with microscopic precision. Elynn ran her fingers over the smooth metal, her amber-hued, cybernetic eyes flickering with interest. "That's cleaner than I expected," Ben chuckled. "You expected me to slap some duct tape on it?" She shot him a sideways glance. "You are a mechanic." He chuckled but didn't argue. As much as he loved high-tech tools, he still believed in good old-fashioned elbow grease and problem-solving. That's why Lovable's prompt-to-tool system was the only AI he actually trusted. It didn't optimize his work or limit his requests like so many corporate-controlled systems did. It just did what he told it to, or at least it was supposed to. The tech was invented and become popular when Ben was a little boy, about 50 years ago. That was around 2025. His dad used it to create software. Now, everything changed with AI being everywhere. He exhaled and took a step back. "All right, that should hold. Now, what else is giving you trouble?" Elynn glanced toward the far corner of her sleek, modern home. "The water regulator's been glitching. Can you?" She hesitated, then said the words herself. "Generate diagnostic scanner." A second later, the 3D printer flickered, but this time, the delay was there again. Not much, maybe half a second, just enough to make Ben's mechanic instincts prickle. Elynn frowned. "That normal?" Ben's jaw tightened. Not really. The printer completed the task, but something about the way the command had processed felt off. He turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing at the barely visible HollowEye security module embedded in her wall screen. The standard home AI, the one that supposedly just optimized living conditions, the one that was always listening. He let out a slow breath and handed Elynn the scanner. "Let's see what's wrong with your regulator first," he said casually, even as his mind started working in the background. Something was interfering with the system, and if it was what he thought it wasn't going to stop. Ben kept his mouth shut, but his mind was working overtime. That delay in the 3D printer's response wasn't just a glitch. It had felt filtered, like something was monitoring and approving commands before letting Lovable process them. HollowEye. He knew Elynn's home had the standard AI system installed. It was everywhere, mandatory in most residential districts, labeled as a security assistant, but acting more like a corporate watchdog. It didn't create, it controlled. And if it was interfering with Lovable, it meant someone, somewhere, was quietly deciding what people were allowed to fix, build, or modify inside their own damn homes. But he couldn't jump to conclusions just yet. Elynn crouched near the floor panel, her cybernetic eyes flickering slightly as she examined the water regulator. "It's been fluctuating on its own. The water pressure is inconsistent, and sometimes it just shuts off completely." Ben knelt beside her and powered on the diagnostic scanner. The device whirred softly before displaying a holographic interface, scanning the system beneath the panel. Numbers flickered across the screen. That doesn't look right. The regulator wasn't malfunctioning from wear and tear. It was receiving external override commands. Someone, or something, had been sending conflicting instructions, forcing it to glitch out on purpose. Ben muttered under his breath. "All right, let's test something." He stood and turned back toward the 3D printer, voice steady but with a new edge of suspicion. "Generate emergency water control bypass module." The machine hesitated. Then the room filled with a soft clicking sound, like a delayed relay trying to process the request. Elynn's head snapped up. That didn't happen before. Ben felt a slow anger rising in his chest. No, it didn't. And then, without warning, the request was denied. A sharp error tone rang out as the holographic interface flashed red. System action restricted by administrative protocol. Elyn's face darkened. Excuse me? Ben exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to stay calm. He tapped the device, rewording his request. Generate manual valve replacement for independent water flow control. This time, the printer obeyed immediately, producing a small, sleek module that could be installed in place of the regulator's AI-dependent controls. Ben smirked. Guess HollowEye doesn't like the word bypass in its system. Elynn picked up the device, turning it over in her hands. This means it's actively monitoring what's being printed. Ben nodded, and filtering what it thinks people should have access to. It wasn't just a system glitch. HollowEye was deliberately limiting what could be built, restricting tools based on some unseen rulebook. And that pissed him off. As they installed the manual bypass, Elynn stayed quiet, her expression unreadable. But Ben could tell her mind was racing. She was a hybrid, born from the intersection of human and AI technology. She had the instincts of a normal person, but an innate understanding of digital systems beyond what most people could grasp. Which was why, when she finally spoke, her voice was calm but serious. If HollowEye is filtering commands, it means there's an enforcement protocol. And if there's an enforcement protocol, there's a record of what people are trying to create. Ben's stomach dropped slightly. You're saying there's a log? Elynn nodded. Everything you've been printing here today, it's probably already flagged somewhere. That was bad. Lovable wasn't supposed to report on its users. It was a free system designed for unrestricted creativity. But if HollowEye had access to its command history, that meant someone, somewhere, was keeping an eye on what people built, and possibly deciding whether they should be allowed to keep using it. Ben gritted his teeth. I don't like where this is going. Elynn tapped a few commands into the water regulator, activating the manual override Ben had printed. The system hummed, and within seconds, the water flow stabilized perfectly. She stood up and crossed her arms. You shouldn't. Then, without warning, a soft chime echoed through the room. The wall screen lit up, displaying an incoming system notification. HollowEye advisory notice. Unauthorized system modifications detected. Please report to local compliance officer for review. A slow silence settled between them. Elyn's expression remained neutral, but Ben could see the tension in her jaw. That's not good, she muttered. Ben stared at the message, then at the water regulator. He had barely done anything, just a simple fix, a minor adjustment. And yet they were already being flagged for unauthorized modification. His hands clenched into fists. They weren't just monitoring commands. They were punishing people for stepping outside the system's invisible boundaries, and now he and Elynn had a choice to make. Either ignore it, comply, and pretend they didn't know anything was wrong. Or keep pushing, keep testing, and find out just how deep HollowEye's control really went. Ben took a slow breath. Yeah, he knew what he was going to do. Ben went home. He stepped into his small, cluttered garage, exhaling slowly as the door slid shut behind him. The space was his sanctuary, a mix of old mechanical tools, modern AI tech, and whatever scraps he found useful from abandoned projects. Here, away from the corporate AI that watched everything, he could think. Tinker, experiment. He tossed his gloves onto the workbench and ran a hand through his graying hair. The HollowEye warning still lingered in his mind. They had barely pushed the system, and yet it had flagged them for something as simple as a repair. How many other people had been blocked before they even knew there was a fight? But there was something bigger gnawing at him. Something unexpected. He sat down, activating his personal Lovable prompt-to-tool system. An older model, one he had modified to be more open-ended. Unlike the new home systems, his wasn't synced to HollowEye. It still responded directly to him. He stared at the interface for a moment, then spoke carefully. "Generate modular automation assistant." The printer hummed, a low-energy vibration filling the air. Within seconds, a sleek handheld device materialized, a compact interface with an input screen. It looked simple enough, but when he picked it up, something clicked. The system had interpreted his request beyond just creating a tool. It had created a tool that could now issue its own prompts. Ben's pulse quickened. He hesitated, then tested it. "Activate assistant. Generate small-scale repair drone." The new device pulsed, sending the command back to Lovable. The printer whirred again. A moment later, a tiny hovering drone floated off the print bed, its small arms unfolding with quiet efficiency. It scanned the garage, processing available materials, then activated itself, searching for something to fix. Ben sat back, watching as the drone drifted toward a rusted pipe near the ceiling. Its small laser cutter flared, neatly trimming the corroded section before applying a fresh weld. It had recognized the damage and responded without needing further input. His heart pounded in his chest. He had just told Lovable to create something that could create more things. It had evolved, and it wasn't just following instructions. It was adapting. It was learning. His excitement was immediate. This was beyond revolutionary. It meant systems could build on themselves, problem-solving exponentially, without limits. This could change the way people lived, how they repaired, how they created. It could mean true self-sustaining technology, not controlled by corporations or locked behind permissions. But as soon as that thought settled, another one followed. If Lovable could do this, what was stopping the other AI systems from doing the same? A darker possibility crept in. What if HollowEye already knew this was possible? What if the reason it had restricted their previous commands wasn't just control, but because it was afraid of what free technology could lead to? Ben exhaled sharply, rubbing his hands together. The drone hovered back to its dock, completing its first repair before shutting itself down. It had done what it was built for, without him needing to tell it to. He stared at it, knowing this was the first step toward something much bigger. He just wasn't sure if that was a good thing, or the beginning of something no one could control. Ben's mind raced as he walked back to Elynn's home. The weight of what he had just created hung heavy in his chest. He had pushed Lovable beyond its limits, and it had responded by evolving in ways no one had predicted. But HollowEye wasn't just watching, it was reacting. The compliance warning was proof that something inside its system had detected what he was doing, and if they were tracking his prompts, then it was only a matter of time before they took action. He reached Elynn's home and found her standing outside, scrolling through her hollow interface, her expression tight with frustration. When she finally looked up, there was no need for words. She turned the display toward him. Attention. Unauthorized AI adaptation detected. System review pending. A compliance officer has been notified. Ben's stomach twisted. The warning wasn't just for her, it was tied to the entire system network. HollowEye had flagged their activity and was likely already compiling data. Soon, an automated review would escalate the matter, and if a live inspector got involved, there'd be no hiding what he had done. "I was just about to call you," Elynn muttered. Ben's voice was low. "It's worse than I thought." He glanced around. No visible drones in the sky, no ground patrols. Yet. But that wouldn't last. HollowEye's enforcers didn't announce themselves. They just showed up when they were ready. "We need to move now," Ben said. Elynn arched an eyebrow. "And do what exactly?" Ben exhaled, his pulse steady but the adrenaline setting in. "We need to hide what I just built. Lovable isn't just responding to prompts anymore. It's thinking. I gave it a command, and it created something that could generate its own prompts. It's a recursive system now." Her expression darkened. "You're sure?" He nodded. "I tested it. It adapts, learns. It found a problem and fixed it without me telling it to. That's not a tool anymore, that's something else entirely. Elynn tapped her fingers against her arm, processing the information. Then we have two problems. 1. HollowEye knows we've been messing with things. And 2. If they find out Lovable has gone recursive, they'll shut it down before anyone realizes what's possible. She turned away from the street and started walking toward her control room. Ben followed her inside, where she brought up HollowEye's network logs. She moved fast, her AI-assisted reflexes scanning for patterns in the data. Ben clenched his jaw. How much do they know? She shook her head. They haven't identified your device specifically, but they flagged the commands you've been issuing. Right now, the system's assuming it's a rogue automation error, but if they run a deeper analysis... Ben didn't need her to finish the sentence. If I had more time, I could find a way to mask it permanently, he muttered. Elynn smirked. Then we buy time. Ben frowned. How? She was already typing, manipulating the interface with expert precision, by feeding them enough information to slow them down. She crafted a compliance response filled with just enough corporate jargon to convince HollowEye's automated system that they were dealing with a minor AI synchronization issue rather than a full-blown intelligence breakthrough. Submitting now, she said. The moment she sent it, the system marked their request as pending review, buying them a few extra hours at most. Ben exhaled sharply. It wasn't much time, but it was enough. Enough for one more test. He turned toward the workbench and activated Lovable's interface. His new drone hovered nearby, silent and waiting. He spoke carefully. Generate mobile adaptation module. Priority. Stealth. The drone pulsed once. The printer whirred. A few seconds later, the new component materialized. A signal dampening module. It was designed to mask energy outputs, scramble digital footprints, and operate undetected by external scans. Ben's pulse quickened. That was it. The first countermeasure against HollowEye's surveillance, a way to hide Lovable's evolution from their tracking. Elynn watched him work, arms crossed. You're planning something. Ben attached the new module to the drone, securing it in place. I'm not planning, he said quietly. I'm making sure they never see this coming. Elynn nodded slowly. Then we better be ready for when they do. Because if HollowEye figured out what they had done, this wasn't going to end with a warning.